Hey everybody, welcome to Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. Tonight we've got a great topic for you. We're going to be talking about avoiding toxic food landmines, especially this time of the year where the holiday season has a way of putting temptations in front of us all. So we're going to talk about that tonight. Before we do, I'd love to know where you're tuning in the world. So if you're chiming in, let me know. Hello, tell me hello, and let me know where you're from, and we'll get the show going here very, very quickly. So we've got Marie from Canada. I think the Canadians are coming out strong tonight. Nice, okay. So again, let me know where you're coming from. We got Mary Ann from Gloucester, Massachusetts, and Rosemary. Where are you from, Rosemary Johnstone? Talk to me. Lori from Arizona, and Hetty from Tucson, Arizona, and Lynn from South Australia. And we got Susan from Washington, that's state. Cheryl from New Jersey, the Garden State. Soon, Thomas from Texas. Nicole from Illinois. Keep coming, folks. I like to know just how far we're reaching. Remember, if you're new to the show, one of our missions is, and you can put this in the hashtag, it's a hashtag save 100 millions. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to save people's lives by getting this information out to the masses. We want to make sure that people have information that food is important, that nutrition is important, because the mainstream medicine just doesn't talk about it. They slide it under the rug like it's not important, and you can help me reach those people. So if you find this show helpful, make sure you're sharing it with your friends, your relatives, your loved ones, somebody who might benefit from it. Also, make sure you hit the subscribe button. That way we can get you notified as soon as we're going live. You can also go over to glutenfreesociety.org. Make sure, if you haven't already, pick up a copy of our free gluten-free survival kit, and just a great list of information that we'll send you for free that's going to help you navigate the gluten-free diet in a much easier, more concise way without all the pitfalls and mistakes. So, again, let's get started for tonight. We got Anita from Independence, Missouri. I'm going to Missouri this week for the holidays. I've got family up there. Judy from Wisconsin, and Kelly from East Texas, and Rosemary from New York, another Canadian, Ember from Ontario, and Pam from Tulsa, Oklahoma, Huda from Katy, that's my backyard, Jean from Arkansas, Tracy from Milwaukee. All right, and another Canadian. I told you, man, the Canadians always represent the gluten-free warrior kingdom very, very strong. Dana from Ontario, Canada is chiming in. Marlene Belleri is watching. Hi, Marlene. Long time no see. Marlene and I grew up across the street from each other. That's pretty cool, the power of being able to connect people in such a way. So, again, tonight, what are we talking about? We're talking about toxic food landmines. Let's draw in a color that you can see on the board. Oh, wait a second. We got Susan from Houston, and Donna from Katy, and Dorothy from Danville, Illinois. And Juju, I don't know who Juju Bunny Bee is. That must be your handle, from Plano, Texas. And Donna from Katy, another Donna. We got a lot of Donnas from Katy tonight. So, again, we're talking about toxic food landmines and how to avoid them. And it's really a relevant topic because as we go into this week, obviously it's a holiday week, Thanksgiving. Those of you who are in the U.S., I know it's a little bit different in Canada, but those of you in the U.S. getting ready to go off and visit family or have family come in. And one of the biggest toxic food landmines is what I call OPF. Now, the first one who can chime in on the feed and tell me what OPF stands for, we're going to send you a free copy of No Grain, No Pain. So, again, the first person that chimes in and tells me what OPF stands for, we're going to give you a free copy. Let's wait for that answer real quick. We got Debbie from Saskatchewan, Canada, another Canadian. And let's see here. Let's see who is going to catch the... we got Yvonne from Barbados, and we got Peruz from Los Angeles. Okay, it looks like Marie's the big winner. She got it first. I see hers chiming in first. So Marie Garoli, let's make sure that we get her. Marie, if you'll tune in and private message us and send us your address. We're going to send you a free copy of No Grain, No Pain for the right answer. The right answer here, of course, is other people's food. Anytime you're traveling, anytime you visit other people, and they tell you, like if you're following the no grain, no pain diet or the gluten-free diet, the true gluten-free diet, they'll tell you, oh, come on over. I know how to cook gluten-free. I can do it just right, just for you. And you show up and you eat their food because they were just like really adamant that they could help you out, and you ended up getting sick, right? Like this is where OPF can be very, very dangerous. And I know maybe it sounds kind of silly, but other people's food oftentimes leads to cross-contamination, sickness, because they're not educated. They don't know well enough. Like when they're talking about gluten-free, what that means to them is they go over to the local grocery store and they buy the cake mix that's full of toxic rice flour that has cadmium and arsenic in it, or they buy corn chips, or they buy corn flour, and so the gravy's being made with corn flour or something like that, and you end up getting sick because they thought gluten-free meant wheat, barley, and rye-free, and they didn't realize that gluten-free actually means grain-free, and so they made you sick because they were putting things in your food and they just didn't know. So first and foremost, it's very important, and I'm not trying to blame the other people. The responsibility falls to you. If you want to avoid the toxic food trap, it doesn't matter whether this is grandma or Aunt Jane or whoever that is in your family. They're going to try to coax you into eating what they're going to prep for you, but you have to realize that ultimately the responsibility falls on your shoulders to avoid other people's food unless they've had proper training in food technique or unless they're following the same diet. Now that goes to show in many families where people have similar illnesses and autoimmune diseases, they tend to gravitate toward the same diet. And so in those situations, it's a lot easier to eat other people's food because if they eat something that's taboo, it'll make them just as sick as it'll make you. So they're putting greater care and greater and better ingredients into that food. You're not getting the genetic manipulated ingredients. You're not getting the toxic swill they sell as food in most common grocery stores. The packaged boxes, all that kind of stuff that you really want to try to avoid in order to stay healthy. Again, one of the biggest food landmines is OPF. For the holidays especially, very, very true if you're traveling to visit family. Again, and as you're visiting those family members, they don't really know the diet as well as you do. And nor should they. Again, it's what I mean. Don't blame your relatives. Blame yourself if you fall prey to this one. Now, one of the things that you can do, I was going on to number 2, but before I go on to number 2, one of the things that you can do here, and one of the things I like to do one of my favorite things is the travel suitcase, like the food suitcase in a sense. So the food travel suitcase, and one of the things I always travel with beef jerky or turkey jerky or some type of grass-fed, organic, dried meat that's easy to carry, doesn't perish very quickly, so you can carry it. It keeps for a very long time. I like to carry nuts, just dried nuts, and you can buy them in the shell or out of the shell, but very, very easy to travel with. Canned fish or packeted fish, things like tuna or sardine or salmon, very easy to travel with. Packs nicely. So pack you a travel suitcase. That way when you are, if you're on an airplane or if you're in the airport or if you're driving long distances, you're not pulling over at the convenience store. You're not pulling over at the gas station, and buying something that is far from healthy. Most of those things that you can purchase in those types of stores aren't really food. They fall under what I would like to call the fruit category. So other people's, really, if we add an R to that, it's fruit, because that, generally speaking, if the people that you're going to see don't eat healthy, they're not going to serve you really food. They're going to serve you what their perception of food is, but they're not going to serve you healthy. They're going to serve you fruit. And of course, in order to maintain your health, you can't do that. Okay, let's see here. And a lot of you got other people's food. I'm impressed. That means you've all been paying really good attention. We got another Canadian chiming in tonight. Diane from Chilliwack, British Columbia is chiming in. Man, I think the Canadians are outnumbering the Americans tonight. No, I'm just kidding. The Americans are definitely outnumbering the Canadians. But not that it's a competition, right? All right. So we're already getting questions. And again, those of you who have questions, I'll do my best to get them answered as we go through the show tonight. Chime in now, because I'm going to do my best to answer as many as I can within the time that we have allotted as well. So again, we got other people's food, or fruit, if you will. The solution to that is to not let them coax you into eating it. Now, here's another scenario that sometimes happens during the holiday season: is you show up, and if you show up unprepared, in this scenario, let's say you're going to an aunt or an uncle's or a grandparent or an in-law's house, and let's say you're just new to the gluten-free diet. This is the conversation should come up before you show up. And what I mean by that is, if you show up expecting and demanding that you be served gluten-free, grain-free, non-genetically modified ingredients, it's not going to happen, and it isn't realistic of you to show up on somebody's doorstep with all these different demands when that may not be a part of their lifestyle or part of their culture. So part of it is you have to respect who they are and what they currently know and what they currently do or follow. But one of the things that I recommend to avoid the other people's food conflict, because here's what happens sometimes, is you get there, you didn't talk to them, you feel guilted into eating their food because why? Because they worked so hard to prepare for you, right? And that guilt is on your shoulders, but it's your fault for not having a phone conversation or communication with them earlier. Because the way I like this conversation to go before I'm showing up at somebody's house, which is very simple, which is, look, I've got very special food needs, and I don't expect you to meet those needs. They're pretty restrictive by most people's standards. Again, I don't expect you to meet me where I'm at. I also don't expect you to try to coerce me into eating food or guilt me into eating food when I do come. And not that you would try to do that, but I just want to warn you beforehand. I'm going to probably bring some of my own food. And if I don't select certain things at your house, I don't want you to take offense. I appreciate your hospitality and I appreciate what you're doing. It's just that I have a very limited diet on what I can eat if I want to maintain my health. And I know you love me, so I appreciate you understanding and just knowing that this is okay, and that when I get there, if I don't want to eat the food, that it's not me trying to insult your cooking or insult your hospitality. I really do just don't want to get sick. So thank you for understanding in advance. That's the conversation that you should have around that topic. And if you don't have that conversation, this is what happens. You get guilted into eating stuff you shouldn't, and then instead of being able to visit your family and have a good time, you end up being in bed, and now you're the weird person with a lot of weird food allergies who can't handle things, and so now you're sickly. So not only did you get punished in two different ways. You get punished for eating something because you didn't want to make somebody else feel bad, but then you also get punished in the way that people are kind of judging you, and then you get socially isolated as part of that punishment. So again, have the conversation before you show up, and that way you can avoid that. You can avoid the entire. You can avoid that entire situation. Okay, let's see here. Susan's asking, can I talk about what a good amount of vitamin A to take daily? I talked about fat-soluble vitamins a few weeks ago and didn't say how much was good to take. Okay, yeah, vitamin A, look, there's different kinds of vitamin A. So if you're talking about supplemental vitamin A, predominantly it's not really vitamin A, it's carotenoids that you're taking in supplemental form. And generally speaking, it's about 7,500 a day is about a dose for carotenoids to take in on a regular daily basis. If we're talking about vitamin A and how much is necessary, if you're trying to boost the immune system, then we're looking at much higher. We're looking at 50,000 units for several days. That can be, again, a much higher dose for vitamin A in terms of boosting immune function. Let's see here. So I love seeing a lot of you chiming in right now. Oh my gosh, I carry foods in a cooler as well as nuts. Yeah, the food suitcase, the cooler, however you like to travel. But a lot of you, that's just validation for, why it can be necessary. We live in a world, look, that's, the other landmine is the world that we live in, and that's OPE. And if anybody can guess that, we'll give away a second free copy of No Grain, No Pain tonight. So if anybody can guess what I mean by OPE, again, we got a free copy of the best-selling No Grain, No Pain book coming your way. So let's just see if anybody can get that answered for us. And while we're waiting, I'll answer Angel's question, which is, do I advocate eating meat? Yes and no. Some people are better served for vegetarian-based diets, and some people are not. I advocate more than generalizing whether somebody should or shouldn't eat meat. I advocate doing the right testing to isolate and identify certain genetic markers and other factors that help you understand what you should be doing as a unique individual. Okay, let's see. We got any answers? Tons of questions, but I don't see any OPE answers coming through. We'll give you guys a few more minutes before we dive into that. Let's see here. Paula says, I take HCl, very low stomach acid, at a meal where I eat meat. If I drink a protein drink for lunch, maybe 20 grams of protein, do I need to take HCl with that meat? Well, with that meal also? Yeah, you can. I mean, if it's a protein drink, it's generally a protein drink itself is not broken down into the independent amino acids. So remember that proteins are broken down. So they're broken down into amino acids, and what helps to do that is stomach acid. So if you're drinking a protein shake, you need stomach acid to get from here to here. And if you don't have adequate stomach acid, even the protein shake, which is easier to digest mechanically because it's basically broken down into liquid form, it's not easier to digest chemically. So putting that HCl on the stomach can be very, very helpful in that regard. Let's see if anybody got the answer right. So let's see. I like that. That's very close, Marlene. Other people's environment is very close, but not correct. Any other people's experience? No. Rosemary got it though. Other people's expectations. Good job, Rosemary. If I had one of those cheer buttons, we'd ring it for you. Other people's expectations. I kind of alluded to that up here, where other people's fruit. And what I wasn't trying to insult other people. Again, understand that our audience tonight, the reason why one of my missions is to reach 100 million people is because our audience tonight is very limited. If we look at how many people actually know what functional medicine is, how many people actually value nutrition for the way it should be valued, it's very, very few. We're what we call the 1%ers of this arena, that very, very few of the mainstream population understand that what they're currently eating is actually fruit and not food. So their expectation of what is and what is not acceptable socially as food, what is acceptable to feed someone, what is acceptable not to feed one, it's their expectation that's different because they have different definitions of what is and what is not acceptable. So other people's expectations of what is normal or what is okay is a very, very big challenge in this whole front. So again, it's part of going back to when you eat their food, it's their food preparation is based on their expectation of what food is. And again, 99% of the population thinks that it's okay that a bowl of Doritos or that Gatorade, right, is a healthy thing to hydrate with. And these, of course, these are socially engineered premises because people don't learn about nutrition. Doctors don't study nutrition, so they don't reinforce proper nutrition. The schools don't teach it very well. The schools still use an antiquated food guide pyramid that was written by attorneys in the food industry who was trying to sell you processed food. So when we look at where people learn about nutrition predominantly, it's not really from a great validated nutritional source. It's from a source that's poor and purposely misleading in order to create a major problem. Okay, let's back it up here. So lots of guesses. Other people's education. I like that too. We could use that one. Other people's empathy. Nope. Other people's environment. Other people, or Oshkosh placement exchange. I don't know where that's coming from, Pamela, but good guess. And then Tracy says other people's energy. We could use that too. Sometimes being around people with the wrong energy is no bueno, if you know what I mean, if you get the gist. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, so Susan's just chiming back in on that question about vitamin A. Yeah, that's true vitamin A, not conversions of carotenoids. Okay, let's see here. I think I got, we got through all the OPEs. We got through all the OPE guesses anyway. We had other people's emotions. We had a couple of you say other people's emotions. A couple of you say other people's environment. So another question I want to answer from Martin is buckwheat okay. Is buckwheat acceptable? Is it gluten-free? Technically, buckwheat is not a grain. It's called a pseudo-grain. The problem with buckwheat is some of the proteins in buckwheat look close enough like gluten that people who are actually truly gluten sensitive can react to buckwheat. But one of the other big problems with buckwheat is it's produced in facilities where other grains are being produced, and so that risk of cross-contamination is very high. As a matter of fact, there was a study published, I want to say it was about almost 10 years ago, where they were pulling product off the shelf that was inherently supposed to be gluten-free, things like buckwheat, and what they found is 41% of those processed foods actually did have enough gluten in them to create a problem for someone with gluten sensitivity. So I don't recommend it for a number of reasons, but those are some of the bigger ones. Okay, what do you recommend dosage daily per billion of a multiflora probiotic? It depends. I generally, again, when it comes to probiotics, when it comes to recommending supplements, if you're asking me what I recommend, there's two answers to that question. One is, if you're in my office, I'm testing you, so it's not like here's a generic amount. Here's 10 billion colony forming units of a probiotic that I recommend generically to everyone. But again, that's if you're coming into me and you're seeing me. I'm going to do the right testing to try to help determine what it is that you need. But if we're just talking about a generic recommendation for a supplement, 40 billion plus is a decent dose. 40 billion colony forming units. So if you want to look up, we have a really good one that's not grown on grain-based cultures called Biotic Defense. Very good probiotic. It's got about 42 billion of some of the most hardy strains of Bifido and Lactobacillus, because one of the things about probiotics is they have to survive the stomach acid, get down into the intestine to be able to properly colonize. So we want to make sure that that can happen. So we use hardier strains. A lot of people just throw in the mix whatever strain, but certain strains are known for being hardy enough to survive that stomach acid. So that's one of the reasons why we want to use a hardy species or multiple hardy species of probiotics. Okay, so here's one of the other things I wanted to talk to you guys tonight about, and that's one of the other landmines is your kids. If you have them. Now, if you don't have them, you can tune this out or not, but many of you have kids or you have grandkids, and that one of the toxic food landmines is kids, because especially if you're going, for example, let's say you've got kids, they're younger, and you're trying to teach them how to eat right? And so you're working against the social, cultural paradigm of other people's expectations and other people's food. And so your kids, they're just at grandma's house and they want a cookie because grandma wants to make cookies, because that's what grandmas do. They want to spoil their grandbabies. So, you've got your kids to think about, not just yourself. So part of it is educating them. Part of it is giving them the lessons and helping them understand what is and what is not healthy. But the other part is protecting them from their own bad choices. A lot of people will say, well, you've got to let your kids have the freedom to decide and choose. That's how they become adults. And I don't disagree with that to a certain extent. But there are some things that you don't give your kids freedom to choose, especially at certain ages. And so, giving them the freedom to choose whether or not to eat a cookie or to choose whether or not to eat Frankenfood, in my opinion, is a bad idea, because there have been studies that have been done on kids where you give kids choices, food choices. And in these studies, the vast majority of the time, kids make the wrong mistake, or not the wrong mistake. Kids make the wrong choice because they don't pick for health. They pick for instant gratification. Remember, that's a big part of what raising kids and teaching kids is, to teach them about long-term consequences as opposed to about instant gratification. And when it comes to food, where's the instant gratification? When you're competing against food where they've engineered the food to stimulate certain areas of the brain, to stimulate certain taste buds, to basically to be more palatable so that people like it more. Remember, there's a huge science behind creating food that makes people want to eat more of it, right? And if you're not teaching your kids about that, then the choices that they're going to be faced with when they're facing, making that decision, these things taste better. These things, for many people, it's more palatable, it's creamier, the texture is more pleasurable. Kids have been targeted for the research, so a lot of the food products are targeted for kids' taste buds and the way kids are going to perceive texture and taste of food. So you have to step in, you have to be the guide. So, letting your kids not have the full freedom or the full reign becomes very important, because again, this is one of the biggest challenges because, again, if you're going to a relative's house and there's cousins and other kids there and they're all doing that stuff, again, you kind of have to put your foot down in certain areas, and this is one of those, because what will end up happening, or what oftentimes ends up happening, is we get big behavior shifts and big illness. Remember, this is the time of the year where, and I've talked about this in the last few episodes, where the sunlight exposure that we're getting is less. Our vitamin D levels have dropped. We've got mass sharing of germs through school because school started back up. We've got mass sharing of germs when we get a bunch of people in the same house for the holidays. And now we're going to add one of the unhealthiest things in the world to the equation. So we've got an immune system that's already ripe for being barreled over. And now we're going to throw a bunch of sugar and a bunch of grain and a bunch of toxic compounds and chemicals at these kids who are already maybe teetering. And so you're going to get behavior change, but you're going to get immune change as well. The behavior change comes in, if you've ever given a 2-year-old sugar for the first time, you know what I mean by behavior change. You remember, food can act like a drug, and you remember, a drug is defined as anything that makes you think, feel, or act differently. And so you're going to get behavior change because of the dyes and the chemicals and the added sugars. Remember, a lot of these things act as stimulants. That's a U, not an A. Act as stimulants, and so you're going to get behavioral change. But the other thing that these things do is they immunosuppress. So they will reduce the immune system's capacity. A lot of people after the Thanksgiving holidays end up coming down with illness. They end up getting sick as a result of sharing more germs. They end up getting sick as a result of overdoing this. And then again, that's going to affect you, because when they're sick, now you're stressed. And then that's just one more burden for you to have to deal with. So kids can be another one of those where you have to really watch them. And again, what you don't want to do is you don't want to have handcuffs on your kids, and you handcuff them away from the refrigerator, and you don't let them have the freedom to interact and be social. And this part of this, it's maybe too late even to be talking about this, but part of this is in the way that you educate them. It's in the way that you teach them about food. It's in the way that you teach them about the long-term consequences of what this actually does, this fruit. Again, because if they don't understand it, then they're just going to think that you're being overly restrictive. And when kids don't understand something, they tend to cheat or steal or deviate from that norm. But if they understand it, again, you're going to get better compliance through understanding. And that ultimately is what you want to make sure that you're educating them about. I love this. Slew says, came across your talks via the Autoimmune Summit. Life-changing, comprehensive work. Thank you for all you. Extremely appreciated. What are your thoughts on spinal health, overall health, like digestive? So lots of thoughts on that, Slew. Spinal health is very important. Your spine houses your central nervous system. It houses your spinal cord, which your spinal cord has the branches of nerves that feed everything. If they feed your extremities, they feed your organs, and vice versa. So think of your spinal cord as a two-way highway that connects your brain to the rest of your body. And so information is going out from your brain and coming back from your organs and other tissues. And so there's this two-way communication, right? And so if spinal health is poor, then that two-way communication can be hindered. It can be diminished. So spinal health is extremely important. It's part of the triangle of health. If you watch the autoimmune, those of you who didn't watch the Autoimmune Revolution, go to autoimmunerevolution.org. We call it AIR for short, autoimmunerevolution.org, and watch it. I think the replay is still going on, and if it's over already, then pick up a copy. You can purchase the entire event. It's about 35 hours worth of material, and definitely worth your money if you haven't watched it and you want more of this information. But one of the major concepts that I discuss is the triangle of health. And, in kind of brief synopsis of what that is, you've got your genetics play a central role. So in the center of this triangle is your DNA, and your genes are like light switches. They can be flipped off or on. And they're flipped off and on based on your choices. So when you make a choice, you turn on a gene or you turn off a gene. For example, if you make the choice to eat a bunch of sugar and not exercise, you turn on your genes that produce insulin. And the reason why you do that is because your body knows that all that sugar and lack of activity, that sugar needs to be controlled. So your body naturally makes more insulin to keep you from dying from a diabetic coma. So your body is responding to your choices. It's adapting to your choices. Remember, adaptations are healthy for you. They keep you alive. But if your body is forced to adapt to bad behavior for long periods of time, that's what we call illness. Remember, illness is nothing more than your body adapting to try to warn you, and you ignoring those warnings long enough that doctors now can take your set of symptoms or your cluster of problems and give you a diagnosis. Keep that in mind. So that's really what all disease boils down to, unless we're talking about trauma, okay, or unless we're talking about just gross acute infections. So most of our chronic diseases, autoimmune diseases particularly, fall under this auspice. The P, the C, and the S, what does that stand for? The P, because the question was spinal health, the P is physical health. And so physical health has to do with the spine, the shape of the spine, the structure of the spine. It also has to do with the structure and the shape of the muscles, the toneness of the muscles, whether or not they're in atrophied state or whether or not they're nice and limber and flexible, right? It's the physical frame. It's what you can see with your eyes. For example, physically, have you ever seen somebody limping or hobbling, right? They obviously either have a muscular imbalance or they have some type of physical pain somewhere that's changing the nature of the way their body moves. That's a physical aberration. The C stands for chemical. This is what we specialize in measuring biochemistry. That's food. That's nutrients. That's whether or not a person has bacterial or viral or other types of microorganism imbalances. That's whether or not a person's being exposed to chemicals on a frequent enough basis that it bombards their system to create illness. And then the S is the spiritual, emotional. So think of this as, maybe not all of you are religious, I am, but the spiritual is your spiritual connection. If you're not religious, it's your emotional connection with people around you and with the earth. So if you are at a job that sucks your soul dry every day you go in, that's an example of putting yourself in a poor emotional environment. If you're around an abusive spouse or an abusive friend, or if you've got relationships that are very combative, this is an example of putting yourself in an environment that's not going to be great for you. So all three of these work together to influence the behavior or the light switches of your genetic code. So it's all important. I mean, physical health is equally as important as biochemical health. So you can't separate one from the other. And that's the whole point of holistic medicine. Holistic medicine doesn't piecemeal things. It doesn't take only the chemicals. See, this is what doctors would have you believe, that if you have a chemical imbalance and that they could give you a drug to fix your chemical imbalance. But drugs don't fix a chemical imbalance. Drugs manipulate chemistry and change the way that you feel, but they don't fix why the chemistry was imbalanced in the first place. They only add further artificial kind of interference, if you will, and that's why drugs don't cure disease, unless we're talking about, specifically, we're talking about like an antibiotic that can cure an infection, a bacterial infection. There certainly are exceptions to the rule, but generally speaking, medicines given for chronic degenerative diseases do not cure the diseases. They mask the symptoms, allowing you to have a false perception that you're doing better, and it allows you to keep making the same physical, chemical, and spiritual mistakes repetitively so that the disease progresses and the medicines just keep piling on. And that's where a lot of people are in this world. The medicines keep piling on, and they don't actually fix the underlying issue. Okay, so Kristen says, I can't get my husband to understand the importance of being gluten-free for himself and our daughter, who's 3 and diagnosed with autism. He spoke with other people's parents and pediatricians who know nothing on nutrition and takes their word over mine. It's a tough scenario, Kristen. What I would recommend, that you do is, first of all, friends aren't qualified to answer that kind of question. And I could argue that sometimes pediatricians aren't, because pediatricians don't take nutritional training. I mean, a lot of their nutritional training was provided by Nestle and Similac, the formula, Ross and Abbott Laboratories, those formulas that where if you look at baby formulas, the number one ingredient is corn sugar, genetically modified corn, sugar, and soy oil. Like, that's not nutrition. That's not healthy. So if you want to really get an answer as to whether, because autism doesn't mean that you need to be gluten-free. Let's be clear. There are lots of different reasons a person can develop autism. Gluten-free diets can be helpful for somebody with autism, but genetic testing is what you want to make sure that you get done, because without the right testing, you're not going to get two people with differing opinions to agree on a massive diet change, because again, if we're talking about your husband's idea of healthy and your idea of healthy, they may be two different things. His expectations of health may be very different than yours, and it sounds like that's the case. And so you have to come to terms with each other in a loving, respectful way. And in my opinion, the way that you do that is you test your daughter to see whether or not she has a gluten issue, and then you can both come together with an actual result and say, okay, look, this diet may not be right for everyone with autism. I can agree some pediatricians are right in that front, but in the case of our daughter, we tested her, and if that test result is positive, now you can have some type of black and white that helps guide you in helping you and your husband see eye to eye on making that dietary shift or change. Very few people will want to make this kind of change based on what we call a subjective measurement, meaning I think it's the right thing to do. A lot of people go gluten-free and feel better, especially kids with autism, but again, that's subjective. That's more observational, subjective. It's not unique, it's not specific, it's not about your daughter's unique chemistry. It's about other people's experiences, other people's expectations. And look, at the end of the day, it's very, very hard to get two people seeing eye to eye if you don't have black and white data that helps you reach to that conclusion. Okay. Let's see here. So, sorry folks, I'm trying to get to your questions. Sometimes technology is awesome, but my phone just froze up on me. Denise says, just had my first kidney stone. I'm gluten sensitive and intolerant along with fructose malabsorption. Do you think these problems could also cause this? I mean, it's hard to say. Kidney stones come in different flavors and varieties, and the most common is for kidney stone is a type of stone called calcium oxalate stone. Without having, whether or not the doctors took your stone, if you were able to collect it and have it analyzed. But in my experience, a calcium oxalate is most commonly caused as a result of vitamin D deficiency, and so not necessarily caused by gluten per se. Not necessarily caused by fructose malabsorption per se, but generally speaking, vitamin D, if you don't have enough vitamin D, understand vitamin D, a lot of people talk about vitamin D today, but very few people know what it actually does. One of vitamin D's functions is it tells the intestine, so we're looking at the intestine, it helps the intestine absorb calcium. So if your vitamin D levels are low, then you don't absorb calcium in your intestines very well. And what then happens to that when you're not getting enough calcium in, that sends a message back up to your brain, and it tells your brain to release something called parathyroid hormone. And parathyroid hormone, or PTH, is going to go to your bones, and it's going to tell your bones, that's my rudimentary bone stick there, it's going to tell your bones to release calcium into the bloodstream. And that's because so understand that this mechanism is that because if calcium becomes too low, if your calcium in your bloodstream becomes too low, that can actually be life-threatening. It can cause arrhythmias, and it can kill you. So your body has this really unique way of turning on parathyroid hormones so that it will dump the calcium that's in your bone, that's been stored in your bone, into your bloodstream to prevent this from happening in the scenario where your vitamin D is so low that you haven't been absorbing calcium. So remember that this scenario leads to low calcium levels in the blood, which then signals the brain to release parathyroid hormone so that we can get the calcium from bone into the blood. And this is one of vitamin D's functions. So in my experience, we're talking about kidney stones. Now back to the original question, which is, well, why would that cause kidney stones? Because you get too much, you get increased calcium in the blood, and then the kidney has to filter that, and sometimes the kidney will precipitate calcium oxalate stones. And that is, for the vast majority of people that have kidney stones or recurring stone issues, this is a big part of the problem. So if that's any of you, and that was a great question, by the way, if any of you suffering with vitamin D deficiency, if you haven't had your 25 OHD levels measured, let me rephrase that. Any of you not suffering with vitamin D deficiency, any of you suffering from kidney stones, need to have your 25 OHD test done. Ask your doctor to run it. It's a super easy blood test to run. It's not even one of those more advanced markers. It's a very common marker. And if your level is below 30, you got a problem with vitamin D. Your level, really, you're shooting for 50 to 100 would be ideal. And if you have autoimmune disease, 70 to 100 would be even more ideal in terms of your vitamin D level. So again, you've got you've got to have that measured if you've got a history of kidney stones to rule it out. Now, sometimes there are other esoteric types of kidney stones, but we'll save that for another day. Oh, I like this question. Do I think that recovery from chronic fatigue syndrome is possible? It's absolutely possible. Look, Dana, and this goes for any of you listening. If you don't have hope that you can recover, guess what's going to happen? Very simple. I mean, this is not a semantic type of answer, but the lack of hope, an absence of hope, is hopelessness, right? And if you have hopelessness, hopelessness means you're not ever going to get better. So you definitely need to have hope. Hope is one of the most critical things that you can have spiritually. That goes back to this, that triangle of health. If you have hope spiritually, then you can set yourself up for success emotionally, psychologically. It's the number one ingredient. It's necessary to heal. And if you're hopeless, you've already lost that battle. You've already lost the war. So hope, very, very, very necessary in order to heal. Okay. Mary says, I completely support genetic testing. However, insurance companies are now making it very difficult for people to get compensation for it or even get approved to do it. Here's the thing. Don't depend on your insurance company to be healthy. Your insurance company doesn't care whether you're healthy or not. They're gonna charge you every month regardless. Remember that insurance is not even really insurance. They're taking your money from you over a long enough period of time, hedging their bets, because they know that most people, are not going to cost that insurance company all of the money. There are going to be very few people, or a percentage of people, who are very, very sick and who expend a lot of money with their insurance, and they're going to mitigate their costs on those sick people. But they're panning that, or they're hedging their bet that the vast majority of people don't get so sick that they're an exorbitant cost from that insurance pulled money. Your insurance company is not looking out for you, is my bottom line, is what I want to say, and that you are the one who has to look out for you. So don't base or judge what you need to spend to be healthy. Look, insurance is also not going to pay for organic food. They're not going to pay for your gym membership. They're not going to do a lot of things that could make you healthier and save the money in the long run, and that's on your shoulders. So don't look for them to do appropriate lab testing either. My advice to anyone who's out there in the world, especially the chronic illness world, is get you a catastrophic policy. Pay the minimum requirement for insurance, because insurance is not looking out for you. Insurance isn't about you being healthy. Insurance is about, it's about if you come into a situation like a car accident, you fracture a bone, or you need a major surgery, that's where insurance can really pay off. But when we're talking about chronic disease management, look, insurance isn't going to do you any favors, because the things that insurance covers are basic blood work and medications. And medications don't cure disease. So if you're spending all of this money on insurance so that it can provide you with some type of help when you need it, but the help that it's providing doesn't really cure your disease and it doesn't work with your philosophy or your mentality, then why are you paying all that money into that insurance plan? Again, I know we're not talking about insurance tonight, but don't judge what you should afford or not afford based on whether or not insurance is going to cover it. Because insurance, again, they're not looking out for you. It's not in their best interest to necessarily look out for you, because they're already making plenty of money off of you. Monica says, what do I think of happy lights? Do they help with seasonal depression and vitamin D? They don't help with vitamin D. You need UV light to make vitamin D, but happy lights, also sometimes referred to as sun lamps. These lights don't produce a UV that helps you make vitamin D. What they produce is a type of light frequency that helps your eyes convert melatonin or produce melatonin. And remember, melatonin is a hormone that helps your brain. It's an antioxidant. It helps with your sleep. So very, very important. But I like happy lights especially if you live in a very northern climate where there's a lot of rain and there's very little sunshine. These types of lights are used very frequently in states like Washington and Oregon. They're used a lot in Alaska. They're used in other countries like Russia, where the daylight hours are minimal. Let's see. Mary says, how important is it to take the same vitamins every day, or can you take them every other day if they're very expensive? Well, first of all, Mary, you get what you pay for. And second of all, I don't recommend just taking massive quantities of vitamins, without knowing whether or not you need them. Now, multivitamin is a little bit different. Multivitamin is very safe and very effective. And so, again, if you could clarify that, I'm not sure what you mean, because some people are like, they go buy all kinds of different things. They're buying CoQ10, they're buying, extra vitamin C, they're buying extra vitamin B complex, they're buying all different kinds of things and just taking massive doses of lots of different things. And I don't recommend doing things like that, not without justification. It's one of the things I like to see is I like to see lab testing in order to answer that question better. Yeah, Daniel says having muscle spasms and twitching all the time turns into extreme stiffness. I have an irregular heartbeat. Could these be from my celiac? Any suggestions? All lab tests come up. Let's see here. All lab tests come out normal. I'd say you're probably not getting the right lab test done, Daniel. You've really got to push your doctors to run more advanced nutritional screening. It could be from celiac, because one of the side effects of celiac is damage to the intestine that causes malabsorptions of vitamins and minerals. And so very, very much so, muscle spasms can be an imbalance in things like calcium and magnesium and potassium. So that is a very big possibility, but without doing proper, and I'm not talking about serum or blood levels, you got to get intracellular levels. So ask your doctor to order intracellular levels of nutrients, and you'll get a better answer as to whether or not that's creating a problem. Okay. Where do I recommend to buy Happy Light in Alberta, Canada? Do we have that link? Can we put that link up for Happy Lights? We can put that up in the feed. There are a number of different companies, and there are a lot of different companies that do it. Somebody's asking if No Grain, No Pain, the book, is available in Spanish. We're working on it. Not yet, though. We can get it in German and Polish and Chinese and several other languages, but unfortunately not yet Spanish. All right. Somebody's asking, it looks like Vintage Various is asking how much vitamin D. Vitamin D depends on whether or not you're deficient. If you're very deficient in vitamin D, if you're under that 30 mark, for most people, most adults, 120 plus pounds, it takes generally to get that corrected. It can take 10,000 units a day in micellized vitamin D, and that's vitamin D3, cholecalciferol. A lot of doctors will prescribe something called ergocalciferol, which is the inactive form of vitamin D, and they'll give it to you in 50,000, not 10,000, but 50,000 unit pills, and tell you to take one a week. That's not enough. One 50,000 unit pill a week for an average adult who's very vitamin D deficient is not going to move their vitamin D levels very, very much at all. You might get 5 to 8 points of increase with that dose, but you're not going to get the dose increase that you really need with a 150,000 IU cap a day. Again, 10,000 units a day of a micellized version, which equates to 70,000 a week, is enough to really get good correction for most people. Again, the key though there is measuring and monitoring. You don't want to take high doses of vitamin D too long, and if you've got kidney disease, you certainly want to make sure you have a conversation with your doctor, because remember what vitamin D does. Helps you absorb calcium, and if you take too much and you're not monitoring it, you can raise your blood calcium levels too high, which can put a lot of pressure on your kidneys. So if you have pre-existing kidney disease, that can lead to some major problems. So again, if you're looking at high-dose vitamin D supplementation, really work with a doctor that's trained in nutrition to get you some solid testing and answers as far as what you need to do. Let's see here. I think I got those questions answered. So Elena says, I have discovered that I have endometriosis. The doctor suggested a biopsy. My concern is that if the growth happens to be malignant, those cells get into the blood, it may spread. Any suggestions? Well, endometriosis is not cancer. So, unless your doctor says there's endometriosis, but we also see that there's a tumor and we suspect that that might be cancerous, endometriosis itself is not a cancer. So, you might just have a deeper conversation with your doctor. If he thinks there's a tumor there, then talk with him about the risks of a biopsy transmitting those, if there is a tumor, transmitting those cells into the bloodstream, and the risk of metastasis from having a biopsy done. That's the best answer I can give you with a very limited information, though. Let's see. Brian says, my wife has celiac disease and now malabsorption. What can she do? We cannot find a doctor in my area that deals with that condition. There's a lot that you can do. If she's got celiac disease, the number one thing that she can do, hands down, without any doctor's help at all, is go buy a copy of No Grain, No Pain and have her read it cover to cover and have her follow the diet protocol in chapter 7 and 8. That's step one, hands down. Follow that, chapter 7 and 8. All it is diet change. But a lot of times when celiacs get a diagnosis, they're told incorrectly what foods they should be avoiding. They're not told about some of the other kind of what we'll call them tricky or hidden sources of gluten. They're not told about GMO. They're not told about soy. They're not told about a number of the other things that we know that can exacerbate the celiac condition and prevent somebody from getting better. So that would be step one. And then if you read chapter 10 and 11 in the book, I kind of outline different types of lab tests and other things that you should be asking a doctor to do. Now, if you can't find a doctor in your area and you're looking for somebody face-to-face, you can always go to glutenfreesociety.org and you can check out our Find a Doctor. I actually have postgraduate training for doctors, and so we have a number of doctors who have come through our program and have been certified to understand what gluten sensitivity and a true gluten-free diet actually means. And so you might be able to find a doctor in your area through that database that we have as well. Okay, looks like we got that link posted up for the sun lamp. So I can't remember who was asking about the link for the Happy Light, but that link has been posted up in the feed for you. So feel free to go check that out. Let's see here. So Jane says, so when I'm eating OPF, other people's food, do I go ahead and eat their food even if it's not organic? It's a choice that you have to make. I personally don't like to. Simply because I go through such effort and I go through such, we'll say such effort and detail orientation to not want to subject myself to that. But everybody's going to make a different decision. Some people say, well, you can eat non-organic foods, but just don't eat the dirty dozen. If it's a banana and you peel it, there's less pesticide on the inside than there is on the outside. So technically, eating a non-organic banana should be okay. Like, that's what you'll hear. That's what you'll read about on the internet. But I look at it very, very differently. When a farmer has to spray pesticides and other chemicals in order to grow food in their ground, and we're eating that food repetitively, it's a slow form of poison. You're getting that slow form of poison. Look, the most dangerous forms of poison aren't quick poisons. Quick poison's easy. You can pick it up. You can feel it. You can feel bad immediately. You know it's a quick poison. Slow poisons, in my opinion, are much more dangerous. And so eating other people's food when it's not organic, if you make a habit out of doing that on a regular basis, I think you're going to land yourself in trouble. So I personally don't recommend it. But that would fall on you. Okay, let's see here. So, again, toxic food landmines for the holidays. We're talking about other people's food. Have that good conversation with them before you go visit them. Let them know, hey, you may be bringing some food that you're not trying to assault or insult them. Not that you would assault them. Insult them, and you're not trying to spit on their hospitality, so to speak, right? You're just really trying to get healthy and again, have that conversation in a loving and a respectful way so that you can set the stage for success when you do travel to someone else's house and you don't get into this whole game of being guilted into eating something that you shouldn't. Understand where other people are coming from, other people's expectations. If you don't understand where they're coming from the psychological perspective, then you don't come across as a nice person. You come across as a food snob, and then they brand you as such, and then that can create friction in relationships and other things. But so understanding where they're coming from and their expectations, and knowing that you're not expecting them to meet you at your level, you're just expecting them to respect your wishes to not eat what they're eating. In essence, you're asking them to respect your decision about what you can eat or can't eat, and you're also at the same time not demanding that they do something different just because of you. If you've got kids, don't sanction or justify the dyes, the chemicals, and the sugars just because a grandparent wants to spoil them. Again, that goes back to the communication. Have a conversation, communicate, even with those family members, and educate your children. Spend the extra time educating your children. Your body is your temple, right? And if you're spiritual, we all know that. It's part of what's in the Bible. Your body is your temple. It's the one thing that you have in this world that is sacred, that you have to take care of. And if you're not taking care of it, remember the strongest pathway to health is self-love. If you love yourself, then you will have the capacity to love others infinitely. But if you don't love yourself, you're starting from a false premise, and you can't spread love very effectively if you're not loving and taking care of yourself. So lead by example first. Very, very critical, very, very important that you lead by example, and that you don't ask your kids to do things that you're not willing to do. But you also need to educate them from a very early age, so that you remember, there's a lot of brainwashing, there's a lot of social engineering, you're fighting against food advertising, you're fighting against doctors, you're fighting against other people's expectations, you're fighting against a complete paradigm that has been kind of molded and created over the last 100 years. It is on it's on its head. It's Alice in Wonderlandian like. It's absolutely wrong. So you've got to make sure that you spend the time and the effort before the day, so that at least their understanding of what you're trying to do, and when you're protecting them by not allowing them to, basically kill themselves with permission. If we can, Denise is asking if we can put a link up to doctors who've gone through parts of our program. Oh, it looks like we already got that done. Awesome. Monica, yeah, we take on new people all the time. Feel free to call our office at Origins Healthcare, and we can put that up in the feed for you too. Okay, let's see if I got any more questions before we wrap it up. Oh, I like this last one. Crypto says, my teenage son tested negative on 2 celiac gene tests. What does that mean for his siblings? Are they still at risk? Look, celiac, you got to know more about genetic testing. Celiac genes are not the same thing as gluten-sensitive genes. You can have non-celiac gluten-sensitive genes. So if your other child was tested for celiac genes and was negative, it doesn't mean that there's not a non-celiac gluten-sensitive gene pattern there. Again, maybe we can put that feed up for genetic testing, where you can learn a little bit more information about genetic testing, because a lot of doctors will run celiac gene tests, and a lot of people will go to 23andMe and they'll get a genetic test done where there's some celiac genes that can be looked at on that test. But the reality is those are celiac genes, and there are more than just celiac genes. There's a subset of genes called non-celiac gluten-sensitive genes, and if you don't get those tested for, you could be non-celiac but still be gluten-sensitive, and that's where a lot of people are, is they don't have, the doctor didn't diagnose them with celiac disease, but they've developed some other form of autoimmunity. I've seen non-celiac cases develop rheumatoid arthritis and lupus and scleroderma. I've seen them develop type 1 diabetes. I've seen them develop Hashimoto's thyroiditis. I've seen them develop diseases like polymyalgia and ankylosing spondylitis and psoriatic arthritis and eczema and psoriasis. So there really, to date now, there are over 100 forms of autoimmune disease. Depending on who you're reading and what research you're reading, some say there's 90 different forms of autoimmune disease. But we know that gluten can cause autoimmune disease, and we know that many people with autoimmune disease are gluten sensitive, and they don't develop celiac disease, but they develop other forms of autoimmunity. And so again, if you have a celiac gene test done, it's not necessarily specific, okay, for non-celiac gluten sensitivity, which can also lead to other forms of autoimmunity. And that's kind of a general 2-minute summary of genetic testing. But go check that link out. You can learn a little bit more about gene testing and what's important and what it actually tells you. Okay, we are going to wrap it up. Make sure you mark your calendars. Every Monday night, 6 p.m., we're here for the Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain Show, minus holidays and minus vacation time, right? So every Monday night, 6 p.m., you can hit the subscription button. You can also hit the notification button down below. and that way you'll get instant notification when we go live. But generally, that's every 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, Monday through Friday, or every Monday rather. And then also make sure, if you haven't already, if you're not familiar, pick up your copy of No Grain, No Pain. You can get that at major bookstores. You can get it on Amazon. Go over to glutenfreesociety.org. If you're looking at the gluten-free diet and you really want to dial it in, sign up for our free gluten survival kit, and it's free. It doesn't cost you anything. So get your gluten-free survival kit just by signing up for our newsletter. We have the world's #1 gluten-free newsletter with over 1 million people, and so make sure you sign up for that, and we'll get you that information. You can also make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already, and you can get there by youtube.com/glutenology, and you can subscribe there to make sure that you get access to the archives of our show. The Pick Dr. Osborne Brain Show is archived there on our YouTube channel. So until next Monday, I hope you all have a fantastic holiday, have fantastic Thanksgiving. We'll see you next week.